Hey, everybody. Really happy to see that you're able to attend the safety roundtable today. I'm Eric Brock with HST Construction, chair of the Safety Council. As Tony just hit the record button, the meeting that we're about to attend is being recorded. So if you need to review anything that's been discussed, you can go back and look at it at another time. We'll be sending out a link to the seminar at the end of today's meeting. And with that, Tony's going to introduce our speaker. If you have questions during the session, please put them in chat. We're going to be monitoring the chat the entire time, and we'll pop in and ask Ray questions as they come up. And of course, at the very end, we'll do a little Q&A as well. So with that, Tony.
Good morning, everybody. So like Eric said, today's topic is going to be on outdoor heat exposures. We're going to be reviewing kind of what the current standards are, and then kind of diving into what the emergency rules and permanent rulemaking are going to look like in the future. Today we have Ryan Allan, who's the Standards Technical and Laboratory Services Program Manager for the Department of Labor and Industries. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ryan.
All right, thank you, Tony. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here and happy to try and do what I can to answer as many questions as possible. And please understand, if you have questions I'm not able to get to, I do have technical staff and technical managers that I'll take your questions back to, and we'll follow up with answers as appropriate. We want to make sure that we answer anything and everything we can through this process. And so I just appreciate having the time today to spend with you. So let's see how I can go to next slide. I've got to figure that out. Hey, there we go. It's been a while. I've been on Teams for so long, I'm readjusting to Zoom here. So please be patient with me. So I do want to get into some timeline emergency rule stuff that's kind of going on. I know this has been a big deal for a lot of people. We are pursuing emergency rules this summer for outdoor heat exposure. That is part of our permanent rulemaking process as we move forward with an update to our heat stress rule permanently. Our anticipated adoption date is going to be June 1st, 2022. We will be building in some sort of enforcement delay in that. Traditionally with permanent rules, when we finalize a rule, we at least have 31 days and or even more to give employers an opportunity to read the rule, to understand it, to kind of, if they need to buy something, conduct training, whatever they need to do to help get up to speed and compliant with the rule. And so we want to take that into consideration even for emergency rules moving forward, even though they're effective upon adoption. So I don't know what that is yet. There's still some internal discussions about what that enforcement delay would look like, but I do want to let you know that you won't see a rule posted on June 1st and have a compliance officer on your doorstep June 1st, making sure you're compliant with that rule. That's not how we want to operate. So I just want to put that out there. The emergency rule will be in effect for 120 days. That is our limitation for emergency rulemaking. And you can continue to provide feedback on the emergency rulemaking process. And below, you'll see two emails for our technical staff, Laura Rascon-Padilla and Bradley Farrar. So if you have questions from a technical nature or just want to reach out and gather more information, those are some great contacts to have. You can also email me anytime as well, and I can reach out to them and get you whatever information that you're looking for. All right. Getting into the rule and the emergency rule. Here's some topics we're going to discuss today. Trigger temperatures. What does that look like for the current rule? And what's that going to look like in the emergency rule that's going to be in effect June 1st? Drinking water provisions, cool down, rest periods, shade, climatization, employee observation, and training. A lot of these topics aren't just emergency rule topics as much as they're in the current rule, but we're adding more specification. We're getting a little more prescriptive on what they are. For instance, when we get to shade, we've always had a definition of shade. We've always had a responsibility for an employer to find ways to allow employees to cool off if they are feeling that they're getting overheated. And now we're just going to get a little more prescriptive on what that shade is, what it's to look like, what are other alternatives to use. So I like to think of this as, for those really familiar with rulemaking, you have your performance standards and you have your specification standards. Like confined space is a perfect example of a performance standard. Every confined space is different. Therefore, we could not possibly make rules for every single type of confined space in every industry that we could ever come across. It's just not physically possible. So it's very performance based. It kind of leaves a lot to the employer to make decisions on, compared to something like asbestos abatement, where there are very specific things that we expect an employer to do. And so heat stress, we're taking some of those performance-based measures and we're adding a little specification to them in the emergency rule. Going forward, so trigger temperatures. The current rule has trigger temperatures of 52 degrees, 77 degrees, and 89 degrees. 89 being the most common that most employers have to contend with. And for last year's emergency rule, we added high heat provisions at 100 degrees. We went away with that 100-degree high heat discussion, and everything's going to kick in at 89 and above in the emergency rule going forward. So your trigger temp for when the rule is in play and it requires an employer to take action is going to be the same May 1st as it is June 1st. The difference will be what is expected of an employer and what they have to do after June 1st when it's at 89 degrees. And that's where, like I was talking about before, it's just going to have a little more specification on what needs to be required. So for the emergency rule, there's no change in trigger temperatures. I will say, as we go through the permanent rulemaking process, we are looking at that 89 degrees if something needs to shift. We did not change from that 89 because we're going through the emergency rulemaking process. And if we're going to change that, we really wanted to go through the appropriate APA process and do a cost-benefit analysis on any potential new trigger temperature that we would decide to enforce. So there's the reasoning behind that. So in the current rule, obviously there is a provision that drinking water is available on site so that, you know, people can drink water throughout the day, stay hydrated. That's going to be an important thing to do to battle heat illness. And we are adding a clarification, just as we did last summer for the emergency rule, that it needs to be suitably cool. We did get a lot of questions about what suitably cool is. And technically, if you were to look at the research, it would say 60 degrees Fahrenheit is suitably cool. I will say that I'm the one that said I'm not putting a temperature in the rule. I'm not going to have people out there taking temperatures of water. And I do not want to be in a position where 62-degree water is not good because we want 60. It doesn't make sense to me. What we were trying to get at there is there have been incidents where water is just left out in the heat with no other source of cooling whatsoever, and then the employees don't drink it because it's just too dang hot. So we just expect an employer to keep it in shade, keep it on ice. I mean, every employer is going to be a little different. Every work site is going to be a little different for what they can do to help keep that water drinkable and suitable so that people will come drink it as needed to prevent heat illness. Another provision that is being added, and this was part of the emergency rule last year, and this is something that it was required in the permanent rule as now, We're adding a little more specification to that and what that means, but allowing employees to take preventative cool down rest periods if they're feeling the signs of heat illness and those symptoms. And I can completely understand the two frames of thought that a lot of employers probably have. One, I'll have an employee who isn't getting any work done because they're constantly taking breaks, and we got work to do. And then you have the ones who aren't going to take any breaks, regardless of how they feel. And then that's when bad things happen too. So trying to find a nice balancing act by allowing people to, if they have the signs and symptoms, if they're really feeling it, that they need to be able to take those cool down periods, because the end goal is just to not have people end up in the hospital with heat illness, or even worse, the morgue as opposed to the hospital. So, and I know we had a few heat illness fatalities last summer, especially during that high heat. So just wanting to add additional protections and provisions for people to be able to accommodate themselves, because this is a tough one. You don't know how somebody's feeling, what their symptoms are. You know, you're really trusting a person in this case to make the right decision for their health and their needs. And one of the challenges with that for a lot of employers is you don't really know necessarily medically what your people are dealing with, and you can't take action on it because you can't ask, and yeah, they may elect to tell you and they may not. So just trying to build in some provisions there to prevent people from getting sick. So shade, this is something that while we have a definition for shade in the permanent rule, we don't actually have any specifications or any requirements that an employer has to provide shade in the permanent rule. Shade is there. It's something that can be used in the permanent rule to help employees reduce their body temperature and stay cool. And so May 1st, there's a shade definition. It definitely could be used. Come June 1st, there's going to be requirements to have shade and where that shade should be. The shade of a porta potty isn't going to work. The shade of a tractor isn't going to work. It's got to be something that's sufficient to be used to reduce body temperature. It's got to be accessible. It's got to be able to accommodate the amount of employees it needs to accommodate. They should be able to sit in the shade comfortably in some way, shape, or form. They shouldn't be all just cramped in, and as close as practical for where the employees are working and where they can get to it. There are other means that could be used to reduce body temperature as well, and we were adding those provisions in there as well. There's, you could have an air-conditioned trailer, you could have misting stations, cooling vests, because I know I recognize that every employer's work site is different. Heat stress covers a whole range of workplaces that are all going to have their own unique settings, and we're trying to build in enough provisions so that an employer sees what options they have available to them that's going to best work for their work site and their employees there. So permanent rule right now, starting May 1st, shade is definitely a definition in the standard that could be used. Come June 1st, there is going to be an expectation of shade being provided, and or at least some other mechanism such as misting stations, cooling vests, air conditioned areas, something to reduce body temperature for employees. Acclimatization is, this is kind of a new area that we're getting into. And I will say that we've got a lot of feedback on this. So this is one of those areas, if you're looking at the draft rule and you're kind of thinking, what's that going to look like? You could see some changes here. And you know, one of those questions is this something we really want to address in the emergency rule, or is this something maybe better left for the permanent rule? 14 days of work, is it 14 working days, or is it 14 days in general? These are some of the questions that are coming in that we need to sit down and talk about, and we will be next week. But I just kind of wanted to point out that if you're reading the draft rule, this is an area where you could potentially see some changes between now and June 1st. But we definitely recognize that, you know, someone growing up in Bellingham that's going over to the Tri-Cities to do work, they're not going to handle the heat in that same way that the people who live there and work there already do. So what can we do for those 14 days to monitor and keep track of those workers who are just at a little more high risk because they're not used to working in that heat, and getting them adjusted to working in that heat? So that's where you start getting into your close observation, really talking about communication, buddy systems, some sort of effective means of observation. Once again, we're just trying to build some parameters in there so an employer can look at their work site and think, how can we adapt this to the work that we do? And trying to build that in for a logging company, a construction company, and an orchard, so they all are able to get done what needs to get done. That's what we got to figure out, and that's what we got to put together. And we're still kind of modifying and working on this section as it stands. But acclimatization is definitely an important factor and something we want to address in the emergency rule starting June 1st. This is also going to be a new addition here. This was an addition last summer for the emergency rule at 100 degrees. As I stated before, we went away from the high heat language at 100 and just kind of kicked in everything at 89 and above. So now you're looking at that mandatory cool down rest period, 10 minutes every 2 hours. As we move forward into the permanent rulemaking process, there's been a lot of discussion about work rest cycles and what that would look like. And is 10 minutes every 2 hours good enough? Is it good enough at 89, but not at 100 or not at 105 or 110? We're sticking with the 10 minutes every 2 hours for the emergency rule. We feel that if we're really going to dive into work rest cycles, there's a lot more research we need to do, and going through the APA process and going through the cost benefit analysis and its impact. Just thinking of, and I don't know if anybody does concrete here, but I just can't imagine a concrete company trying to lay concrete and we got a 50-50 work rest cycle. Like, that's just not going to work. And so how can we address that? I just want to put that on everybody's radar for permanent rulemaking down the road. There's going to be a greater discussion for work rest cycles. Right now, it's 10 minutes every 2 hours, and trying to keep it kind of limited for this emergency rule moving forward, and address the bigger issue through the APA process of permanent rulemaking. Once again, you see the same communication by voice, observation, or some other means. If you're complying with the acclimatization communication, then you're complying with the other effective communication as well. And that's more spelled out here. Above 89, the buddy system, other effective means, regular communication with employees, just trying to keep up with how they're doing, how they're feeling. I will say the fatalities that I have heard about and have been connected to, it's not common for an employee to be out on their own and not being able to address signs and symptoms of their heat illness, and no real way for an employer to be able to contact or track them down. And that's when bad things happen. And, then it's just an unfortunate where we're on site and somebody's passed away and nobody wants to be on that work site at that time when that happens. So just really staying in communication and allowing people their breaks and cool down and rest periods is what's important. There are no provisions for this come May 1st as far as that goes. So a lot of these are kicking in with the emergency rule, and it's something you'll see moving forward with the permanent rulemaking process as well. And that leads me into some training. So obviously I'm fully aware May 1st, you have to have employees trained up on the current permanent heat rules. And come June 1st, there's going to be additional provisions and additional training that's going to have to be conducted based on what's coming out in those changes. I'm hoping we are getting as much information out as possible regarding those changes. We are really working with our education outreach. We have them connected to all the stakeholder meetings, all the internal meetings, all the discussions that are taking place, so that they can actively work on training materials and other documents to assist employers with training and giving them the resources that they need to help train their employees. So that's an active process right now. And I can tell you the pressure is intense to have everything done, ready, and available for employers to be using come June 1st. And I feel that pressure every day. And I recognize it. We definitely want to get that out there. And it's a tight timeline, but we recognize the importance of getting what you need out there and available for employers to be able to use. Some of the additional training provisions that are going to take effect coming June 1st, as we've discussed, you got your preventative cool down rest periods, you have your mandatory cool down rest periods, the provisions of shade and the specific requirements to that, the close observation and effective communication, and obviously some updates to the APA the APP and your heat illness provisions within that. All right. Once again, some contact information for Laura and Bradley. They are wonderful resources. I couldn't be happier to have them on my team. I'm sure that if you have any questions, they will do everything they can to provide you the best response possible for any questions you have. We have our rulemaking site here. And today, I just approved it like 20 minutes before I logged on here. We are going to be posting the Q&A from the May 4th heat stress stakeholder meeting, so you can see what questions were asked and what kind of responses were provided. And so that should be getting to our website today and at worst tomorrow and publicly available. And Tony, I can just also send you a copy as well, since I have that, and you can send that out with the PowerPoint for anybody who wants it.
That would be awesome.
Happy to do it. And that is my last slide, and I'm hoping I can answer any potential questions anybody may have.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes.
You had mentioned that there's an education outreach effort to include some of the new provisions in the emergency rule. Is that, I think that we've used an L&I video to train our field staff in the past. Is that something that is included in that effort? Would that be available sometime after June 1st?
I'll have to check to see if they're making a video. I don't know about a video. I do know that they're putting like FAQs and other documents together, template programs that kind of cover some of the new provisions, but I'm not aware of a video. I know there's been challenges in getting people together to make those videos, and the timelines on that can get a little tight. So I'm not feeling too optimistic that I'm going to hear that they are, but that's not fair for me to say if I don't really know. So I will follow up with them to see exactly what they're planning on making, and then I can follow up with you to kind of show you what their plans are.
Okay.
And if it includes a video or not.
Gotcha.
Hi, Ryan. I have a quick question just kind of regarding what the current rules are regards to, I mean, so much of heat exposure, heat stress is focused on outdoor temperatures. I grew up in a contractor family. My dad was in HVAC, and I remember crawling in attics that were way above temperature than as far as the outside ambient temperature. How is the current rule, and are there any potential changes to what's currently there as far as what's going on inside. How do we address that with some of our members with, hey, it's only, it may not be trigger temperature outside, but in this attic, it's 100 degrees, et cetera, et cetera.
So we really don't have a lot for indoor. And even what we have is, unless you're working for one of those factories that has like really, really extreme conditions, the code for indoor is so old that it says workmen. So if that tells you when that was written.
Yeah.
We will be pursuing indoor heat, but we are focused on completing our outdoor heat permanent rulemaking process first. Indoor heat is going to be a heavier lift on us because we don't have a rule, so we are starting from scratch. The other part of the challenge with indoor heat is there's just not a lot out there to really work for. OSHA doesn't have it. Minnesota actually has an indoor heat rule. That's the only one we've found so far. So we were petitioned for both indoor and outdoor. We're focusing on outdoor. We don't really have anything for indoor unless you're working at like an aluminum smelter factory or something like that. And indoor heat will come, but it's going to be down the road.
Okay. Yeah, I just throw it out there just because I know that some of our mechanical contractors, installing ductwork or piping or, just getting in some of those, maybe not confined spaces, but spaces that are significantly, especially in attics, significantly warmer, in danger zones. So something to consider.
Absolutely. We get a lot of complaints over the summer, especially during heat waves in locations where it's not common to see central air conditioning.
Sure.
So you're looking at HVAC, you're looking at kitchens, you're looking at a lot of different places where we get a number of complaints. So we completely recognize the need for that, but we're not going to pursue emergency rulemaking in that effort.
All right. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Okay, Ryan, a question just came through in on the chat. This is from Heather with Evergreen Concrete Cutting. She wants to know, as a subcontractor with only one or two operators on a job site at any given time, how would they comply with the shade rule? Can they safely rely on the general or upper tier contractor to provide the shade? Or should they be purchasing like a pop-up tent for each of their vehicles?
So it's always interesting to rely on somebody else to protect your employees. Although I understand, I've seen it so many different ways, right? The ultimate responsibility is going to fall on you if your employees aren't protected. So if you are going to rely on the general contractor or somebody else, it would just be a good due diligence on your part to make sure that what is going to be provided is adequate and is going to work. So just keeping an eye on the site and making sure that those things are actually done. Because at the end of the day, if a compliance officer shows up, you're the employer, you're the one that had the ultimate responsibility in performing that safety and health function for your employees. Having said that, I mean, certainly you could do some pop-up tents, but that is another reason why we said additional other effective means. So if they have a truck and that truck has air conditioning, they could sit in the truck with their AC on. You wouldn't want them in a truck with no AC. That's not going to provide a whole lot of support. It's going to probably make it worse, but certainly an air-conditioned cab, we're not going to really have issues with, as long as it's effective and a means to cool the person down from the work that they're doing.
Okay.
And if you want a more specific answer for that, Bradley and Laura could help out. There's also Eric Smith, who's our construction technical expert as well. Or you can email me and we can kind of get into more specifics for your specific issue or site.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions that's been coming up in the stakeholder meetings regarding adequate shade. Because a hot vehicle sitting in the direct sun, even with the air conditioning, could still be warm, but it maybe not as hot as what it would be exterior.
Right. How well is the AC working in that
Yeah.
vehicle too? I can understand that as well.
All right, another question came through, question, has L&I compared our rules to the Army Corps EM 385 rules? Has there been anything that correlates to see if we're in factoring into what our rules are going to be?
Well, I can't speak specifically to Army Corps 385.11, although I am an Air Force guy. So there's a reason I probably wouldn't go to the Army rules. I'd probably go Air Force. But having said that, I do know we did look at some DoD stuff. We've done that for wildfire and heat stress. That's where, you know, I talked about work rest cycles. Military's got a lot of stuff on work rest cycles that we've been looking at, but that's just not something we felt we wanted to address in the emergency rule in its entirety. So while I can say, yes, we have looked at military documents, mostly DoD, those things that we are looking at and evaluating from those documents aren't things that we're looking at for this summer, and more in the permanent rulemaking process, more specifically those work rest cycles.
Which brings up a good question, and I know it's been asked before, but I want everybody to have a clear understanding. When it comes to the rest cycles and having the additional 10 minutes per 2-hour work when it's excessive heat, can that 10 minutes be added to a regular rest break during that work period? So if every 2 hours you're taking like you get a normal 15-minute break for 2 hours of work and then you have your lunch, can you add that 10 minutes to either side of those breaks and still be in compliance?
I know we are saying that the preventative cool down rest period must be paid unless taken during a meal period.
Yeah.
So you can combine it with a meal period. And I'm just looking for my specific notes on that because there was a lot of discussion and we really do want to make it easy as possible for employers in providing those breaks and when they have to be paid and the breaks that are already required. So having them combined is not going to be an issue with us as long as they're getting that 10 minutes every 2 hours. And like I said, that the lunch one, the one break has to be paid unless combined with a lunch, and then you're covered there.
Okay. Another question just came through. Does specific clothing have to be provided by the employer?
We do not have any specific requirements for any clothing that has to be provided. I think the only time you really see clothing is when you're dealing with somebody who's wearing non-breathable clothing or double layer woven clothing, and that just impacts the trigger temp. That's not necessarily something the employer provides. Now that non-breathable clothing is probably PPE, so the employer is providing it, but once again, they're providing that for PPE purposes, not heat stress. They just need to recognize that if I got a pesticide applicator going out there wearing a Tyvek suit and it's 85 degrees, their trigger temp is actually 52 based on any vapor barrier stuff that they're wearing.
Okay.
So no specific requirements in heat stress to provide any type of clothing, although cooling vests are an option to help keep people cool, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. All right. Going back to the water temp topic, I know this was kind of a lot of back and forth in previous meetings.
Yeah.
And I understood your take on it, but so we're not going to be asked to sit there and monitor running water, just as long as there is a reasonable, cool way to provide cooling off sustenance, I guess. So whether that be from just water bottles in a cooler that have been sitting on ice, to even being able to run a potable water through some sort of mechanism such as a garden hose. I know everybody hates that, but I've got kids who on a hot summer day, they go run the hose for 10 minutes just so that they can get a quick drink of water without coming into the house.
Yep. Absolutely. And the only sites that really have issues with that on the running water part are typically agriculture when you're dealing with irrigation, because then you're getting into that potable issue. But most other work sites have some sort of access. And I kind of look at it like this. Everybody who's in this meeting, spending time with me today, listening to me, is probably already trying to keep their water at least somewhat cool so that employees can drink it. And they recognize that water sitting out in 100 degrees all day, no one's going to want to pick up and drink. And so, but we do also get a lot of complaints for a lot of people who aren't sitting in this room with me, who really don't ever care to hear me speak at all, who may leave their water out just however they please. And it could be a problem for employees trying to access and drink it. Because we do get those complaints, and we do have to go out on site and deal with some of those issues. So wanting to put some sort of specification in there, such as suitably cool, so that if we do go on site and just see some egregious stuff, and we have employee interview after employee interview that says, I can't even drink the water, it's just too damn hot, it's dirty, it's that we have a capacity to address that through our regulation. Because I think everybody sitting here listening to me today isn't going to do that. You're not going to be on that. And the last thing I wanted to do is put 65 degrees in the rule and worry about somebody taking a temp at 67 and thinking it's an issue. I just didn't want to go there. It just didn't make sense to me. So it's not as specific. It can be kind of general. But I really do believe that if we're citing water in these cases, we're citing egregious actions by people who really could probably care less to comply with our rule to begin with.
One other question. Has there been any more discussion to adding to another trigger temp for when some of these other stipulations come into play? I know there was previous discussions, well, 89 and above is adequate for most of this, but then what about, shouldn't there be another trigger temp like at 100 plus somewhere in there to really drive home some added safeguards?
We did have a number of discussions about trigger temps. That was a big deal. I will admit that we did not get the best feedback on 100 degrees last summer as being a little, not a little, way too high. So that was kind of the feedback we got, generally speaking. We looked at Oregon, we looked at California. We know OSHA's doing some work in that space. And the focus, there will be a change in trigger temps in the permanent rule in the entirety. Like everything is getting evaluated. And so then the question is, well, what do we do with the emergency rule? Because, that's coming up quick and we don't need to, a lot of people aren't happy with our emergency rulemaking process. And I get it. We didn't do emergency rules. I'm about done with the process myself. I will be very excited when things start getting back to normal, moving forward with life. But it just wasn't a good space to change too many trigger temps. And so if 100 was too high, then, looking at 95 or 90, well, then why would we do 90 if 89 is already a trigger temp? That just felt kind of weird. So our decision was to kind of kick these provisions at an 89. That's a trigger temp we already have. It's one that employers and employees are aware of. And instead of changing the trigger temp, we're just saying these are the additional things that an employer is going to have to do at this trigger temp that's already established. And we thought that would make the most sense and be easiest to comply with for employers for an emergency rule.
Got it. Another question just came in. What is the amount of water per employee required to have on site now versus the emergency rule?
So we're not going to change the amount in the emergency rule. So that will stay. And without having the rule in front of me, I believe, is it a quart per hour? I'd have to look it up, to be honest. I apologize. I don't have that off the top of my head. But I do know we're not changing any of the quantity amount with the emergency rule. I can stop sharing and look that up for you too.
Okay.
Yep, 1 quart of drinking water per employee per hour. How about that? I was actually right, but got to verify. I haven't been in the field in a few years, so.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions for Ryan? Eric, anything else?
I don't think so. Just want to thank Ryan for his time and for sharing the information. Clearly, this is a topic that was interesting to a lot of our members. Great to see so many people attending the safety roundtable. And I guess, Tony, you'll be following up with some information from Ryan. Ryan, are the slides going to be available for people? Did I hear you say that during the?
Yes, I sent the slides, and I will send the Q&A from the most recent stakeholder meeting, which will also be posted on our website, hopefully today at the latest tomorrow.
Sounds great.
And I'll make sure to include the links to the rulemaking website. Allan has done a really good job here in the last, I would say, 2 years of revamping their website to have more current information, as well as making it easier to find instead of having to go down some rabbit holes just to realize it's not there.
I appreciate hearing that. I also appreciate that it happened because it helps me too.
Oh man. Yeah, the only thing that I didn't like was the fact that I have a spreadsheet that has a bunch of links that are now dead because of the changeover to the new website format.
Can understand that. And one thing this might be on the website, it might not be. This is more going through government affairs and policy, although I'm involved because we do the most rulemaking in the agency. They are posting a calendar of different stakeholder engagement opportunities so that people can more easily access and see what's going on, when are those stakeholder meetings happening, and what's going on with a lot of that stuff. We just really want to make it an easy opportunity to engage with us through the various rulemakings and different things that we do that impact employers and others in our state.
Yeah, I did see that, and that was much appreciated because there were some things on there that I didn't even know were coming up. Wasn't even on my radar.
Well, good deal.
So, all right. Well, if that's all the questions we have, we can go ahead and conclude this meeting. Ryan, I just want to say thank you for all your assistance today and throughout the process. It's been an interesting ride, and hopefully we'll be able to get something put together that's going to make everybody happy at the end of the day.
That's the goal. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for the kind words. And for everyone else, if you see something in that rule, you have questions, you have comments, you have information to share with us, please feel free to share it. I know the comment period technically ends on the 15th. That's because we've got to get a rule ready to OTS to file. You can keep sending comments in. Just understand after the 15th, we may not be able to address those comments in the same manner as before, but we are in the permanent rulemaking process. So those comments won't go away and they can be considered down the line for the permanent rule.
That's great.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Tony, it sounds like we're done. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so take the extra time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.